So research tells us that the first 5 years of a child's life are crucial for their brain development, but access to early learning opportunities there are disparities there. Different states treat them in different ways, and some of those disparities can cause the readiness gaps that people see in children before they even walk into their year of kindergarten. We're here to talk about two communities who have talked about early learning opportunities in really incredibly different ways. DC offers universal preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds. Mississippi, which is focused on delivering comprehensive early learning to infants and toddlers. Why did you decide to do them that way?
You want me?
We can start with Abigail.
Thank you. Good to be here, Adrienne. So I'm glad you all just heard from Joyanna right before me, because it gave you a little bit of context of how we think about school in DC and access to quality education. When we think about our kindergartners coming into school, we know that there are significant readiness gaps that exist. A ton of brain development, as you said, is happening from birth, but in those ages 3 to 5, that we really want to be able to take advantage of, so we can have kids in really rich learning environments. Some children were already getting that, and for families, as Joyanna talked about, families in parts of the city that had access to resources and access to high-quality preschool programs, that was happening. But for many of our families, they didn't have that same opportunity, and we wanted to ensure that it was widely available to all kinds of kids, and particularly to ensure that young children who didn't have access to those kinds of enriching experiences could have them. So we doubled down about 10 years ago on that work, and as you said, we now are at universal pre-K for 4-year-olds. About 70% of our 3-year-olds are enrolled in full-day pre-K.
What was that ramping up process like?
So it was a long process, and I will say that a lot of amazing people were involved in this work who know much more about it than I, and who deserve tons of credit for it. And I'll try and throw out some of their names as we go. But in DC, over a number of years, there was a coalition that developed of a wide range of community advocates, educators, childcare providers, advocates of all kinds, who came together and really identified this as an important need, and began a long-term process of really engaging the political structures around how important this was, educating all of the various powers that be within the city, including particularly our city council, to get them to understand the importance of that kind of investment. And as you all know and have heard many times, investing in early childhood is paid back in more than full in terms of the benefits that you get, both short term in terms of educational outcomes, but also down the line in terms of reduction in crime, in terms of increased employment that you can see in these long-term studies. So trying to get the folks who held the purse strings in the city to really understand that this is an excellent financial investment, in addition to just being the right thing to do, and then building out the legislative framework that created both the structures and the funding to do that.
Laurie, I want to bring you in here. Mississippi is focused on infants and toddlers. Abigail talked so much about the development that happens in that 3 to 5-year-old range. What about the decision to focus on kids that are slightly younger?
Well, I think in our state, what's interesting is we got into it a little bit later, and there's a lot to be said for entering a decision like that late in the game. There's a lot we learned from other states. And what we learned was a lot of other states also felt that we needed to reach them even earlier. And so in Mississippi, we're still focused on pre-K, but we also know that learning begins at birth. And so while building our pre-K system, we decided to focus on all children ages 0 to 5, including infants and toddlers. So we've taken sort of a comprehensive approach to that in looking at childcare, so early childhood education, as we look at it in our state, is where the children are. So they could be in a Head Start center, they could be in a public pre-K center, they could be in a home program, where they are located. So we're taking services to where they are to try to help improve the quality of those childcare centers. At the same time, as we all know, we can't really help just a child as we're building those services, so we're really focused on the wraparound part of that and helping the family engagement part of it. So we learned this really from some of the workforce development work happening with our WIOA system, and through our technology, we're helping a family as they enter the system and we learn about the wraparound services that they need. We're able to provide services, a common case management, if you will, for the child, and a common case management plan for the parent. And as we're helping the parent through what they need in terms of all the various services, we're also able to provide those through childcare as well. So we have our community colleges in the state that are have all created an early childhood academy, and they are sending out coaches to child care centers to help them improve their quality of the care they're providing for those kids.
I'm so glad that you talked about the quality of care and how that extends kind of past the child to their family and to their communities. Both of the programs in your communities focus or provide help to low-income children and families, but that operating in a rural place versus an urban environment like DC manifests in wildly different ways. What are you seeing in the needs of your individual communities when you talk about low income? What does that actually mean?
Well, in a rural state like Mississippi, it's a challenge to meet the needs of all the rural areas of our state. So access to these quality child care centers, that's why we have found our home visiting programs to be so beneficial. We've worked with Save the Children. We're doing the home visits programs. We're trying to meet these families and children where they are versus trying to move children and access to where we want them to be. So the idea is to have them ready for kindergarten when they get there, and we're trying to expand those services for them as much as possible.
Abigail?
One of the things that we did in DC a number of years ago, we were a Head Start grantee in our public school system. So we've got, as you heard from Joanna, about half of our public school students are in charter schools and half are in DC public schools, our traditional school district. And DCPS had a Head Start grant. And one of the things that was playing out was we would have classrooms for 3- and 4-year-olds where half the kids were in Head Start and half the kids were not, because you only had a certain amount of Head Start slots. But they were all kids from the same neighborhoods with the same needs. And so we would have a classroom in the same school that was a Head Start classroom that had all of the other Head Start resources and services that surround the educational program in terms of health screenings, in terms of parent and family engagement. And then a classroom across the hall wouldn't have access to any of that. Well, that was sort of crazy. And so we, and Miriam Calderon is the person who you all can call to ask how to do this, because she was the mastermind behind it. She worked with a whole coalition of people to convince the federal government, HHS, which gave us our Head Start grant, to create a blended model in DC, where we took all of the local funding that we had, again, for these very same kids, and we took the Head Start funding, and we got Head Start, federal Head Start, to agree that we would provide Head Start quality and level services to all of those students. So we immediately more than doubled the number of kids who were getting Head Start services, because we know that it's not just what's happening right in the classroom and that an individual teacher-student interaction that matters, it's all of those supports.
So what are some of the drawbacks to the systems as they operate in DC and Mississippi? What are some things that you just can't get done based on the way that things are set up in your states?
I was just thinking about the blending of funds. That's something we're struggling with right now, and I think if states had some flexibility to blend dollars and maximize the efficiency of use of those dollars, that would be something that's, in Mississippi we get $199 million in federal Head Start dollars, $99 million in our child care certificate dollars. We have our state dollars for pre-K, and everything's in their silos, and depending which funding silo you are as a 3-, 4-, or 5-year-old child is the type of child care you get to go to. So blending those streams so that we have one unified system is something we're really striving for and is a challenge.
Absolutely.
And I would say, just piggybacking on the last session you all heard, of pushing on quality generally. So, really high quality early childhood education is a lot more than an adult and a bunch of kids in the room, hanging out and playing. Obviously, your first level of ensuring everybody is safe is very, very important and is a threshold, but there's so much more to be able to really ensuring the kind of development for kids, and particularly kids who have particular needs. So our students who have special needs and are beginning to be identified, the earlier you can identify what some of those particular needs are and how you can provide some supports, the more likely you're going to avoid that student ending up in, on a special education track throughout their K-12. Another area that I think we're really focused on and pushing on is students whose first language is not English, and ensuring not that they're learning English, because they will learn English in the school, but actually having more and more programming that is providing them with programming in their home language, which a ton of research shows is going to increase their development, and in fact their language skills then in both languages will ultimately be better. And getting the kind of both the resources and the training and the staffing to be able to do that well is something that I think is sort of a next horizon for us.
I just want to piggyback off of that, kind of the idea about quality necessitates that you balance the need for highly qualified teachers and then correcting for the super low salaries in this space when teachers do get qualified, and having access for low income students, having to move them, or the decisions to move them or not move them around. How are you balancing those things in the programs that you're operating in right now?
Well, in Mississippi, in many states, in childcare, they have something called a quality rating system where we rank childcare centers a 1-star, 2-star, much like we do restaurants. And what we decided to do in Mississippi is, based on the research, we know that children either have quality or they don't. And they don't benefit from a 1-star bit of quality. They actually benefit from having it or not having it. So we created, we got rid of our quality rating system, and we created 2 tiers of licensing. We have a standard child care license and a comprehensive child care license. And if you are a comprehensive child care, well, standard, you meet the basic licensing standards and the federal guidelines for health and safety and many other pieces to it, assessments of children that we're now doing. But comprehensive is not just meeting teacher-child ratios, and again, another set of check marks, but it means comprehensive from the child's perspective. If you're an infant and you're transitioning to a toddler room, a toddler transitioning to a preschool room, preschool transitioning to kindergarten, that this preschool has community engagement going on to make that transition for the whole family comprehensive. So to be a comprehensive center, you don't have to meet a set of criteria, although meeting the degree requirements and salary and all of those things are parts of it. It's actually comprehensive services for the child and the family to transition from 0 to 5. So that's something we're working on in our state.
Absolutely.
And for us, I mean, one of the sort of long-term challenges of early childhood is pay for early childhood educators. It's an incredible challenge at the infant and toddler level, and I'd love your advice because we're trying to figure that out for our next round here. For 3- and 4-year-olds, the vast majority of 3- and 4-year-olds in DC are served in our public schools, DC public schools and public charter schools. And they get the same salaries that all the other teachers get in those schools. And so what that means is that, one, we can sort of stand firm on our quality standards in terms of the certification of those teachers. So they all have BAs, all of the lead teachers, but they're getting paid at that level. So one of the challenges I think that often people have is they raise the standard and they say, you need to have a child development associate, you need to have a BA, but we're going to pay you, a pittance. We've been able to have that pay match because we are serving them in most of our 3- and 4-year-olds, not all, but in our public schools. And that has made a big difference in terms of the stability of our workforce, in terms of teacher retention, and in terms of teacher quality.
Absolutely. We've talked a little bit about funding here, and obviously these programs are to get these accomplished, they require a lot of political support before they can be implemented. How did you sell the programs that you're working with? What elements of the program allowed them to get the political traction that allowed you to have conversations about attaining the funding that you needed to implement them? particularly, I'm interested, Abigail, having
Sure.
executed that over a decade.
Sure. So here's where I'll throw out some names, and those of you who are from DC will know that I'm now missing all kinds of names, but there were just some amazing community leaders who took on this fight, from Carrie Thornhill, who ran child care centers, to Terry Golden, who is a businessman in the city, who devoted an incredible amount of focus to this, to Maurice Sykes and Bibi Otero, who were both involved in the early childhood space. And they worked really diligently to develop an incredibly diverse coalition on many, many fronts. As a city, we have all kinds of divisions, as many communities do, and so they ensured that it was a racially really diverse coalition, that there were people from the language minority community, that there were people from all across the city, that it was educators, but it was also business people who were able to advocate for this as, again, a financial prospect, that this is good investment on the part of the city. We have the great advantage in the city of having basically a one-party system. We are a very, very democratic and left-leaning city. And so the sell in terms of, is this a good idea, was not such a hard sell, but you still had to come up with the money to be able to do it. And so what that coalition did is, over the course of a couple of years, everybody who was on the council and the mayor, but also anyone running for council and mayor, every single candidate was asked to sign the Pre-K for All pledge. And everybody did it. And then once they did it, and it was all sort of publicly out there, this coalition then, once whoever got elected said, they signed the pledge, now let's hold them to it. And so there was really a broad advocacy effort to ensure that it got it got to the top of the priority list, and that there was broad city support for it, so that when we now spend just in our public schools on Pre-K 3 and Pre-K 4, around $200 million a year. And we're not a big place. I mean, as you know from being here today. So it is a big investment. I mean, that was a ramp up to that, but we had to get a really wide range of people interested enough to be able to do that.
Abigail, you mentioned DC being an incredibly democratic place, and that furthering these goals. Laurie, Mississippi is an incredibly conservative political culture. What was the conservative case for putting together this program?
Well, interestingly, in Mississippi, it was led by our business community. So we had our business community raise close to $10 million to do research in Mississippi about how we could address this and what we needed to improve in the child care centers and how much it would cost per child, so we could actually delve into it and understand what it takes in a state like Mississippi. So we had Entergy, Mississippi Power, AT&T, C Spire, our big Chamber of Commerce, Mississippi Economic Council, leading the way for that research initially, and that really led the way for the legislature. Then when Governor Bryant took office, that was the first year that early childhood education funding happened under his leadership. So if you talk to anyone in our state now, it's wildly supported. But I've been working on that for probably 20 plus years in Mississippi. So it's not even a conversation. Everyone's supportive of it at this point, but that wasn't always the case, but it's been wonderful.
That's good to hear. One last question before we get one question from the audience. What can other states that are grappling with these issues learn from executions of the programs that you've put together? What's one piece of advice that you might offer?
I think my piece of advice would be to look at the coordination of services. A lot of states have many fragmented early childhood systems. Department of Education funds one thing, Department of Human Services, every state handles that all different, and sometimes by title you have an Office of Early Childhood, but if you look at it again through the lens of the child and how to blend the services to make it easy for the child and the family, that seems to be an approach that seems fully supportive of the research to help children and families.
I think that is all right on, and I would just add that I think focusing on the business community as a key piece of this is really important. There's just such strong evidence and research on early childhood, and people need to hear that, not from the educators who of course are going to say that, but from business people who understand that this is really going to define the future of their workforce.
Awesome. One question from the audience?
Hi, what impact, if any, do AmeriCorps programs such as Jumpstart have on early childhood education?
So we do have AmeriCorps programs that work with young children in various ways, and I think that those kinds of programs are really valuable, both in terms of the direct service that they're providing to those kids and supporting those teachers and other staff, but also because I think it's really important that people see the power of early childhood, and to have AmeriCorps members be a part of those kinds of programs will influence how they go on in their own careers and personal lives to be able to really value it.
Awesome. Abigail, Laurie, thank you so much.
Thank you.